I'm going to save my Harry and Edna till another week. There's a lot of storms going on in this world, and I think you know a lot of the racial tensions and the violence that has broken out. And I just feel that has an impact on the whole country in the way that we think about things and how we comport ourselves. And it also causes us a lot of trouble inside. And I know that many of us are going through storms in our lives. Have you ever lived through a really horrible storm? And I'm not speaking of a metaphorical storm, but a real storm where they're all real. But I'm talking about a storm. What is the worst storm you have ever been through in your life? How many of you lived through Sandy here? Yeah. It wasn't so bad here, right?
Thursday night vacation box. No, Wednesday night.
Thursday night?
Vacation
That's
box.
right.
That was a rough one.
I heard about that one. Yeah,
Well,
Peg.
you didn't hear about mine. I got stalled right at the bridge with 4 kids in the car.
Oh, no.
With the windows up, hot as can be, and it took 2 hours to get it out.
Wow.
And Debbie took the children home, but I was stuck there for 2 hours watching the bridge.
So there's a storm outside the car and a storm inside the car at the same time.
So they didn't get to Bible school until 8 o'clock.
Oh, so sorry. I'm glad they made it, though.
Yeah.
Well, shortly after Stephanie and I returned from our work abroad, we were treated to Hurricane Sandy right here and its devastation, and especially on the shore, which the Methodist Church, began the program A Future with Hope that our church participated in, and they've built something like 250 homes down there to help people. Steph and I had really gotten quite used to severe typhoons while living in the Philippines and in Taiwan. Torrential rains in sheets and power outages and trees falling down. In fact, in one storm, our mango tree fell across the driveway. And while we were there and the power was out and we were with 2 kids in our house, there was a sudden crash and the gutter fell, unloading hundreds of gallons of water on the porch, and the leaves and the debris that had blown over the porch had covered all the drain holes. And so the place began to flood. Water began to come in. We're on the 2nd floor and water is pouring in. It was filling up the living room. And Justin and Mary and Stephanie and I were sweeping the water into dustpans, putting it in buckets, trying to get it out. It was an awful experience. And in fact, it was like about a signal 5 or so at that time. And a number of people in our own town died because of that storm. When I was in college, it was a Bible college, we had a witness mission that was for the servicemen, 5 military bases, and the young men would come in. Sometimes they'd never been away from home. They were at Fort Sam Houston and Lackland Air Force Base, and we would invite them up to this place called the Victory Servicemen Center. And I remember this young man was coming from boot camp at Fort Sam Houston. He'd come there, and I was conversing with him, and we were having some snacks, and I asked him, what do you really want in your life? And he said, I think I just want peace. And I said, what's your vision of peace? What does it look like to you? And he said, peace to me is a moonlight beach. And you can hear the ocean waves, and I'm with my girlfriend. That was an inviting vision of peace, completely understandable. But what about when the pressure is on? What about when the world is falling apart? What about when there's riots in the cities and there's threat of war, even nuclear war? Can we find peace in the midst of those kind of storms? Because we use storms and upheavals of nature metaphorically to indicate problems and perplexities of life that we all have. Can we have peace in the middle of those kind of storms? I think we can. I can understand the beautiful picture of a moonlight beach, but we contend with many conflicts and many contradictions and turmoil in everyday life. When the phone rings and the medical report comes back, it's positive. We need to start treatment right away. When people lose their jobs in mass layoffs. When a wife comes home and finds her unemployed husband, who is supposed to be out looking for a job, but he's asleep on the couch in front of the television, an empty 6-pack strewn across the coffee table and on the floor. These are storms of life. A child addicted to drugs and headed towards destruction, and you know it, and there's nothing that you can do about it. When you get that diagnosis of cancer, severe bouts of life-crippling depression, or the bills are mounting up, or you work day after day in an unsatisfying job, and there's stress at work, or maybe you have a mean boss or an employee that's just impossible, and the car begins to rattle and blow smoke right when you need it the most. The storms of life. Can we find peace in the midst of life's storms? I think we can. And I think God's Word today has a special address to that. Our gospel reading places us in a storm today. Let's unravel the scene. Jesus had just fed 5,000 people, and the crowds went ballistic. They wanted to force Jesus to be their king right then and there, according to John's gospel. But Jesus had other plans. He sent the crowds away, it says. He will not have a repeat performance of the feeding. They need to go home and eat there. And they had a long way to go. It was time to go home. And his euphoric disciples that thought, this is it, this is the moment of the kingdom, seized the day. It says they needed to be compelled to get into the boat and leave. It was getting on towards nighttime. Jesus was not going to go with him. That's hard to say. What are you doing? You're sending the crowds away right when you got them in the palm of your hand, and you're forcing us to get in the boat and leave without you? Where are you going to be when we see you again? So Jesus sent them, and they reluctantly set out, rowing across the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus retired to the mountain to rest and to pray. But according to Mark's gospel, because it's in 3 of the gospels, he kept an eye on these disciples from a distance. It says that he was watching them as they rowed against the wind, because the winds picked up and became contrary. And Matthew puts it this way. Meanwhile, while the boat was fighting a strong headwind, they were being battered by the waves, and they were already far away from land. It says they were sort of like in the middle. And so this is almost impossible, because it says it was at 3 a.m., the 4th watch of the night. How could Jesus possibly see them? And yet Mark says he was watching them. The lake is 14 miles across. If he went out about to the middle of the lake and they're rowing and Jesus is watching, how can he see them at 3 o'clock in the morning? But it said he did. The disciples struggled, but Jesus was watching all along. And then he did a most remarkable thing. He walked out to them right over the waves, braving the wind. It was pitch black, waves crashing over the side of the boat. Jesus chose the hour of the 4th watch, 3 a.m. Of course, this terrified the disciples. They thought they were witnessing a spirit coming across the lake. I mean, if you looked out into winds and waves and you see this glowing figure coming towards you, it said they screamed in dread and terror. They panicked. But Jesus assured them, "Be not afraid, it is I." Mark and John all have the story, but omit the part about Peter getting out of the boat to be with Jesus. Jesus came and climbed into the boat. Of course, we had that little episode only in Matthew. Peter said, "If it is you, call me. Let me come. Come." And he started, but said as he looked around, he saw the wind, he saw the waves. He began to falter. He began to sing, "Lord, save me." And Jesus pulled him out. Now, how did the early Christians understand this story? On the one hand, it exalts the extraordinary nature of Jesus, because people don't usually walk on the water. But Jesus did at least once. And we will certainly be astonished at such a report. But that was not the major lesson that the church treasured this story and had it in 3 Gospels. Because it is about us in the world now, tossed and churned up by the storms of life. And where is Jesus? It doesn't seem that he's with us. Now, in an earlier story, Jesus lay asleep in the stern of the boat in a different storm. The disciples were fearing for their lives. They awakened Jesus and said, "Jesus, get up. Can't you see we're about to drown here?" He rebuked the wind and the waves, and everything became all right. But this story that happened later emphasizes that though Jesus was not physically at that time remaining in the boat with them. He was up on the mountain. He still remained in control even in the eye of the storm. Jesus was on the mountaintop praying, interceding as he kept a close watching eye over his beleaguered disciples. At will, Jesus could come down and get with them in the middle of the storm. He is both in heaven right now, interceding for us with all of our struggles and storms. And believe me, whatever you're going through, He knows. And He has a watchful eye. You may not see Him in the boat with you, but He sees you. But He can also be very present to all who call on Him. And sometimes in the middle of the storm, we take our eyes off of Jesus, as did Peter, and we feel that we're beginning to sink. But Peter, in that moment of desperation, called out, "Lord, rescue me!" And Jesus reached down His hand and lifted Peter up out of the water of death. Jesus looks out for us, and He is able to reach us wherever we are in the darkness of the moment. We are in His presence, and He has the power to help. When the storms of life are raging, He stands by us. Now, He doesn't prevent the storms. It happened and it happened again, even in the Gospels. He doesn't smooth out the way. In fact, He said, it's through many tribulations you will enter the kingdom. And we often endure great storms and turmoil in our lives. I remember times in Africa. We were fairly new to be in Tanzania. Mary was at a boarding school. They said she began to be sick. They gave her doses of malarial medicine. We all had malaria many times there. But she kept having recurring fevers. It was Easter time. They had to transport her to the nearest bush hospital. It wasn't much there. They even asked us, "Do you have clean needles?" We didn't. They had to give her IVs. Stephanie had to go down and be with her. It was a horrible time in our lives. It was Easter time. Mary and Stephanie spent time with her in a bush hospital, just trying to buy a little bit of food because you had to prepare everything for yourself. She suffered from these recurring fevers, and we were not sure what was happening. I was already trying to make arrangements as best I could over a very broken telephone system for an emergency airlift with Mission Aviation Fellowship to see if an airplane could come and get her out. Prayer, sacrifice, worry, hope, calling on God, and at the last minute the fever finally broke and we were able to take Mary home without having to get the airlift to Nairobi. We found that many times that Jesus was in the eye of the storm and Jesus remained in control. In the middle of the war, Jesus guards our soul. Christ alone is the anchor when our sails are torn, and God surrounds us in the eyes of the storm. Now, Paul was a man who lived through storms both literal and spiritual. He suffered conflicts within and without. It says he had problems with people, false brethren, people lying about him. But he also said 3 times he was in a shipwreck, a physical shipwreck, and he spent a whole night and a day floating out on a log trying to get rescued somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea during the gales that had run the ship on the rocks. And that's not even the one that we read about in the book of Acts. That all occurred before that last one we read about in the book of Acts. Paul was subjected to violent treatment, even at one time being stoned and left for dead. When you smash your head with rocks until you're unconscious and people walk off thinking you're dead, it's a miracle that you survive. He said he was beaten several times with sticks. He was in jail many times. And in fact, those words that Kate read this morning were written from a prison cell when he said these words, "Be glad in the Lord always. Again I say, be glad. Let your gentleness show in your treatment of all people." Why? The Lord is near. Don't be anxious about anything. Rather, bring up all of your requests to God in your prayers and petitions, along with thanksgiving. And the peace of God that exceeds all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Paul wrote those words, peace that passes understanding. A moonlit beach with the one I love is a very inviting and understandable picture of peace that the young soldier gave me. But what about peace in the midst of the storm? In the middle of the conflict? A peace that guards our hearts and our minds even when the pressure is on. And sometimes on our lives the pressure is on. There's a poem that I read a long time ago, and I thought it was so great I wanted to share it with you. I don't even know who the author was. It's anonymous. But it's called Pressed. Are you feeling pressed today? Pressed out of measure. Pressed to all length. Pressure so intense it seems beyond strength. Pressed in the body, pressed in the soul, pressed in the mind till the dark surges roll. Pressure by foes and pressure by friends. Pressure on pressure till life nearly ends. But pressed into knowing no helper but God. Pressed into loving the staff and the rod. Pressed into liberty where nothing clings. Pressed into living faith for impossible things. Pressed into living a life in the Lord. Pressed into living Christ-like life outpoured. Can you name your storm today? Does it have a name? Oh, that's the wrong one. I want to get my band up here. I have a song that we'd like to share with you. But is your family in turmoil? Is it a financial thing that you're facing? Is it work-related? Health? Are you facing the imminent death of a loved one? Just got another news from my brother the other day. I'm going to have to go back down and help him. He can no longer even manipulate an iPad with his hands. He's gotten that far with the ALS. Or is it the burdensome care of someone that you love? Just talked to a friend last night about close to midnight, and it was a friend from the past, and her husband was diagnosed 3 months back in 1996, 3 months after they were married, with Parkinson's disease. And he is unable hardly to communicate now, but he wanted me to write emails to him. And she's his sole caregiver. She was telling me about the life that she was living. Is your storm related to school or to work or relationships or boyfriends or girlfriends? Just know this. Jesus is watching. And he can come and get right in the boat with you. So today we can commit our storms to the Lord. And we can pray that prayer that Peter prayed to Jesus. Lord, rescue me. And just hang in there. Christ will come. Let's sing this. I'm going to sing a song here. Get the words up now. I want you to sing along with me on the chorus if you know it. And by the time we get through, you'll know the chorus, okay? We're going to put this in our regular songs that we'll be singing here. It's called The Eye of the Storm by Ryan Stevenson. With the solid ground falling out from underneath my feet, between the black skies and my red eyes, I can barely see. And when I'm feeling like I've been let down by my friends and family, I can hear the rain reminding me, in the eye of the storm, you remain in control. In the middle of the war, you guard my soul. You alone are the anchor when the sails are torn. Your love surrounds me in the eye of the storm. When my hopes and dreams are far from me and I'm running out of faith, I see the future I pictured slowly fade away. tears of pain and heartache pouring down my face, I find my peace in Jesus' name. In the eye of the storm, you remain in control. In the middle of the war, you guard my soul. You alone are the anchor when my sails are torn. Your love surrounds me in the eye of the storm. When they let me go, and I just don't know how I'm gonna make ends meet. I did my best, and I'm scared to death that we might lose everything. And the sickness takes my child away, and there's nothing I can do. My only hope is to trust in you. In the eye of the storm, sing it with me. You remain in control. In the middle of the war, you guard my soul. You alone are the anchor when my sails are torn. Your love surrounds me in the eye of the storm. Sing it out loud. In the eye of the storm, you remain in control. In the middle of the war, you guard my soul. You alone are the anchor when the sails are torn. Your love surrounds me in the eye of the storm. Your love surrounds me in the eye of the storm. Let's pray.